Hello, my name is Jason Kelley. I'm a wheat and feed grains extension agronomist with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture. And today I'm at the Mann research station just south of Marianna, and I want to take just a couple minutes and talk about a crop rotation study that we have ongoing here at the station. This is a unique project. This is a project that we started in 2013, and it's unique that it's funded by the Arkansas Corn and Grain Sorghum Promotion Board, the Arkansas Soybean Promotion Board, and the Arkansas Wheat Promotion Board. And the reason we started this project, if you think back over the last 30 years or so, a lot of things have changed. You know, our crop rotation has changed. If you just think about the soybean side of this, 30 years ago we had a lot of wheat, double crop soybeans, and as we transition to today, we typically try to plant a lot of our soybeans as early as we can, and that's typically in April. And we're also planting earlier maturing soybeans as well. And so we went from a double crop system all the way to almost very little wheat today to early planted soybean system. At the same time, our corn acres have dramatically increased. We went from 100,000 acres roughly 30 years ago all the way up to 650,000 this year. In some years we even have more than that. And so a lot of our growers are incorporating corn into their system. And so this project really wanted to verify, you know, we were making the right decisions yield-wise, economically-wise, whether going to that early planted soybean system and including corn was the right thing to do. So this project we started in 2013, and we wanted to look at 8 rotations. And I'm not going to hit on all the rotations today, but the main ones we want to concentrate on, we've got continuous early planted soybeans. So in this situation, 38-inch rows, furrow irrigated, planted in mid-April, a group 4 soybeans. That's kind of our standard. We've got some plots out here. We've grown continuous soybeans for 7 years. This is the 7th year of this project. We also got corn. We've got some plots that have had continuous corn for 7 years, but the main one we want to look at is soybean 1 year, corn the next year. So that's kind of our standard treatment we're evaluating. Then we've also got wheat, double crop soybeans. We've got grain sorghum in here, kind of in place of corn. So we've got grain sorghum followed by soybeans. We've got some other combinations with wheat in there. And so today, just want to touch on basically the highlights of this project. And so if we look at just the yield response and economic response of including corn or grain sorghum on early planted soybeans, it's really pretty dramatic. And so the 6 years up until this year, early planted soybeans, we've averaged about 54 bushel on continuous soybeans, which is okay. But where we put corn or grain sorghum in that mix, so the early planted soybeans are following corn or grain sorghum, our yields go up 6 to 8 bushel on average each year. Well, that's pretty dramatic when you think 6 to 8 bushel at $8, $10 a bushel. That's quite a bit of money that we can gain just from crop rotation there. Our corn yields, what we've seen, we've got 1 rotation where it's continuous corn planted every year. Not necessarily a practice that we would normally do, but we do have acres that are planted that way. But in this situation where we planted corn following early April planted soybean or double crop soybean, those yields are always a little bit better than our continuous corn plots. Not a lot, I think about 7 bushel per acre better when we follow soybeans than our continuous corn plots. We also have incorporated wheat in these plots, so we've got plots where we have corn followed by wheat and then double crop soybeans. And then we've also got wheat following, so we've got wheat following corn, grain sorghum, or soybean, and our wheat yields are always a little bit better when they're following soybeans than corn and for sure grain sorghum. The reason for that's really hard to say. We're doing everything the same, but it seems like every year the wheat yields out of the soybean plots are always a little bit better. Some years the following corn pretty close to where we were on soybeans, but when we follow grain sorghum, there's always a little bit of a drag there. Not really sure why. We're putting the same amount of nitrogen out there, but that's something we've seen in these plots. Not a lot of grain sorghum out there this year, But when prices get up, that is something that more producers may be looking at. We've also looking at the economics of these rotations. You know, we can talk about what impacts yield and all that, and if the economics don't work out, it really doesn't mean anything, right? So we've run the economics on all these rotations, 6 years through, from the very beginning all the way to 6 years, and it's really amazing to me that, and very intuitive, that if you don't have the bushels and you don't have a good grain price, that rotation's probably not going to be as economical as some of the others. And so when we look at the economics over 6 years out of these 8 rotations, the one that really comes up to the top is the corn, followed by early planted soybeans. You know, 50-50 mix, corn 1 year, early planted soybeans the next year. And that really come out to be economically the highest return rotation. Whereas the ones with wheat or grain sorghum, maybe we didn't get all that good of a yield 1 year. If the price wasn't very good, I know when we were doing the economics on these, $3 a bushel for grain sorghum, that really pulled down the economics. So we may have had good yields, but if we don't have a good price to go along with it as well, you know, the economic return may not be as great as what we would like to see. We've also been at the conclusion, or after harvest each year, we take soil samples out of every plot in this field. And so we've been tracking nutritional changes over time, specifically phosphorus and potassium. You know, in all these plots, we soil sample, we follow current University of Arkansas recommendations for fertilizer. And between phosphorus and potassium on all these rotations, we're really not seeing a big change one way or another, not increasing the levels and not decreasing the levels, regardless of what the rotation is. The one exception is zinc. So where we have corn out here, we're putting 10 pounds of actual zinc per acre in the very beginning. And over time, those zinc levels have come up. So when we first started this trial, our zinc levels were very low, soil pH about 7.2. We needed zinc. So now we've raised those zinc levels up enough that when we soil sample, it's not calling for any zinc on corn the next year. So one other thing that we're monitoring during the duration of this trial is soybean cyst nematodes. We have a lot of nematodes out here. Other areas of the state have root knot nematodes, but we only have the soybean cyst nematode out here. And so when we started this trial, we had levels that were really high in most plots, and then we imposed these rotations over 6 years. Things have changed. And so where we've incorporated corn or grain sorghum, those soybean cyst nematode numbers have went down considerably. And that's probably one of the reasons why we're seeing an increase in soybean yields, is just because of the reduction in nematode numbers. One other thing that's very obvious in these rotations is weed control. And so if you look out across these plots, they're clean, very few weeds out there, but pigweed is our main nemesis. And this field, prior to starting this rotation, was used by our weed science project. And so we had lots of weeds out here, specifically pigweed. So over time, we've gradually reduced the pigweed numbers out there. And I hear a lot of producers say they want to grow corn because they have a lot of options to control pigweed. And I agree with them 100%. We have a lot of options in season that we can control pigweed, especially if we use a 2-pass program, some herbicide applied at planting and then a post-emergence later on. So if we do that, we start clean, we ought to get pretty long season control. Now, I see a lot of fields at the end of the year get pigweeds out there and they go to seed, but in this situation, as soon as we harvest the corn, we're either spraying gramoxone to kill any pigweed escapes, or we're doing some tillage. So when we do that, our pigweed numbers have definitely went down. But even with that, the continuous soybean plots out here, if you go through there, my crew, myself, we've chopped pigweeds out here. There's always a lot more pigweeds in those plots versus ones that have been rotated. So that's definitely an advantage to having some rotation out there is weed control. One other thing that we hear a lot about on crop rotation is diseases. And you know, we've got corn, soybeans, wheat, grain sorghum, and really on these small plots in this situation, we have not seen a whole lot of differences in disease pressure. I can't say that the rotation is really helping or hurting us there. So in conclusion, this trial has demonstrated that we can increase soybean yields when we incorporate corn or grain sorghum into that rotation. I think one of the main reasons why our soybean yields have went up is just the fact that our soybean cyst numbers have also been lower because of the corn or grain sorghum crop in there. So we can increase yields. That doesn't necessarily mean we increase profitability or overall economic returns. That's a lot of times dictated by grain price. So if we got a good grain price in combination with the synergistic yield increase with a rotation, I think that's really what we were looking at.